Hilchah Sha'ar Avos Hatumos Perek Arba Aser. Now the Rambam holds that be'emes all sveikas b'chal the Rambam holds that a suffix deraisa min hatera l'kula. The Rambam also holds when you get suffix tumah, the min hatera suffix tumah you don't reckon with the tumah, you don't consider it tumah. That's what the Rambam clearly writes in Perek Tezayin, beginning of Perek Tezayin. However, lepel we learn in Perek Yud Gimel that there are certain sveikas where you start as ashisha sveikas serfnas atruma. So mainly you name on that those sveikas are tummy. You name on that it's tummy. And then there are certain sveikas which we learned that you're toiling. Lo echlin v'le serfen. In other words, you're not sure if it's tummy or not, but you're choished that maybe it's tummy. So on one hand, you can't go burn the truma because you're not sure it's tummy. But on the other hand, you can't eat it because it's a suffix tummy. And then we had also in the beginning halacha yud and Perek Yud Gimel, which wasn't so clear that if it was nitma b'suffix ab mi'ovis hatumis, so then it's serfenes hatruma. If it's a suffix naga, suffix lei naga. But I'll call upon, so even though mi'ikra the din of sveikis is be'emes min hatera, you don't have to be cheshish for sveikis, but midrabanan there were sveikis that the Chacham instituted you should be cheshish, and some sveikis which the Chacham instituted that it's tummy vadek. Now the Rambam is going to say that there's Yud Beis Sveikis, that's the next two prokim, that Yud Beis Sveikis, which tier a Chacham. The Chacham didn't consider it at all a chash, and therefore you could continue it as if it's Torah. That's what we're learning over here. Perek Arbos. Shneim Osir Sveikis tier a Chacham ve'elohim. Now the Rambam is in this first halacha going to say all Yud Beis, and then the Rambam in the next two prokim is going to go ahead and explain each one of the Yud Beis. Ve'elohim. Sufik mayim shuvim lemikveh. There's a suffix if mayim shuvim went into a mikveh and passed the mikveh, as we'll learn. Sufik tumet sofal pnei hamayim. If you have tumah which is sofal pnei hamayim, and it's a suffix if it was metame, so we say yator. Sufik mashkin b'negel l'tami acherim aval l'tumas atzmon tmeim misufik. Whereas if there's a suffix whether this mashkin became tummy, legabe whether it could be metame acherim, or whether this mashkin could be metame acherim. So the shaila is Safik Mashkin L'Tamei Acherim. We say that it's Sveiki Tor, but as far as the shaila, if he became Tomei, we say Sveiki Tomei. Now Legabi the matzav of the Mashkin itself. Safik HaYodayim Ben L'Tumas Atzma Ben L'Tamei Acherim Ben L'Taras Yodayim L'Tumasan is always we say that it's Sveikun Tor. In other words, even if we know that the Yodayim were Tomei and there's a Safik whether it became Tor, so it's a Cheskas Tuma. Nevertheless, we say Sveiki Tor. Sufik divrei seifrim is also, and Sufik achulin if it's negea to chulin, not to truma, but to chulin, which you're doing altaras hatruma, you're eating chulin betara. So again over there, the sveikan we're not cheshish for, and Sufik karbonis as we'll learn behamshech, and Sufik negoyim, and Sufik negoyim, and whether or not you became tummy with a nega or not, and Sufik oiver v'oimed, which is also negea to hilchis whether you find yourself in the mokim of a metzera, and Safik shrotzim, and Safik risharam, and Safik shtei rishuyis. The Rambam is going to teach you all 12 sveikas. Halacha beis. Safik mayim shuvim l'mikvah ketzak. Now the din is shleishel lugim mayim shuvim shenaflu l'mikvah dach paslu. The din is if you have even 39 lugim. Because if you have 40 lugs, no matter how much kol meimish be'elam, they become part of the mikvah, they become bottled to the mikvah. But if you have 39 lugim, now the Chacham instituted that if you put in 3 lugim of mayim shuvim into this mikvah, the whole mikvah, all 39 saw become puzzle, and it's like all of the entire mikvah is mayim shuvim. That's the din. Now, safik naflu, safik le naflu. It's a safik whether 3 lugim of mayim shuvim came in. Or vafilu naflu, even if you know for sure naflu, or besafik yesh bem shiri ein bem. So then the din is Sveiki Tor. And Memela, Variyam Mikvah Bekashrusei, the mikvah remains kosher. In other words, the original mikvah remains kosher. The original mikvah means the original 39 look. You're going to have to put in another 40th look. The Ein Maiden Le Litbil the mikvah Zeh, Velas is Taris Lechatchila. To go ahead, Lechatchila, to go ahead and to be table in this mikvah, Velas is Taris, we don't tell him to do that. However, V'im Tovel V'asa, Lepel, if he was table and he did Taris, is Taris of Tehiris. Now the Lashon Rambam v'im tovel v'osa taris of teres sounds like if he was table v'osa taris is taris of teres. Now the churi yesh mokim lodun. What happens if he was tovel? If he was already tovel, could he go ahead lechatchila and be do taris? No, the Rambam says ein meiden leilitbel v'lasis taris. You don't tell him to go be tovel and do taris. However, if he was tovel and he did taris is beseder. What happens if he was tovel? So the Mishnah Melech says, Mishnah Melech in Mikvoi says, Bepshitos, it's not so clear in Rambam, but he writes Bepshitos, and also there's a thesis like that says that once he was tevel, so he's a Torah. No, l'chatchila we don't tell him to be metayr himself with this mikveh. But once he went into the mikveh, so Memela, since be'etzim the mikveh has a chesk, the pashtus we know on its kosher, and we don't rechanzek with that suffix, so therefore he's Torah already. And now you're not going to go ahead and tell him not to do taras. But you have to understand, to tell him to be tevel and to do taras, you don't tell him. But once he was tevel, so it's like the tefillah is already, he's b'diavad, and knows he was already tevel, and the din is doch that is Torah. So once the din, l'chatchila would tell him, don't be tevel in this mikveh, go be tevel in another mikveh, which was for sure b'seder. But if he was already tevel, so even though he wasn't yet negeh b'taris, we tell him that he could go ahead and do the taris. That's clearly, it says Mishnah Melech and others, it's not tesis. But in Rambam, I'm saying in Rambam it doesn't say so clearly. Halacha Gimel. So that was the first one, was Safik Mayim Shuvim. The second one was Safik Tumet Sofa. Safik Tumet Sofa al Pnei Hamayim Ketzad. What's the pshat? Sheretz Shehoyet Sofa al Pnei Hamayim. You had a sheretz which was floating on the water. Bein Shehoyu Hamayim Bekelim or Bekakois. It makes no difference if the water was in the karka or in the keli. Now V'yorad L'mayim, and you went down into the water. A person went down into the water. Afilu ein sham el malay adam v'tumah. There's not that much space there. There's a place for a person and for the tumah, and obviously in a way that the tumah won't touch him, because if he's there, the tumah has to touch him. So there's nothing to talk about that he touched the tumah. Over here we're talking about there's a place for the adam and the tumah, and obviously a little space in between. So there's a very good chance that he touched it. Nevertheless, Arez a Torah, he's considered Torah. Ad sheyada bevade shenoga. No, since the tumah didn't have a specific place. It didn't have a specific place. It was floating. It was safal pnei mayim. So memela, so he's not tummy. V'layomru safik tumat safa tor ela l'sheretz bilvad. This din that a safik tumat safa is tor is only said b'negei sheretz. Now, when it says only a sheretz, so be'emes the shaila is, it's not so clear what is he being sheila. The pastor, he's for sure being sheila t'mei mes. When there is a mess, by a mess you don't say this din of tumat safa. But the shaila is, what about a nevela? A nevela is not matame with the tumah of a mess, but on the other end, a nevela is more tummy than a sheretz. A nevela is also matame b'masa, although sheretz has a chumrah that it's matame b'kadasha, and a nevela is only b'kazayis. So Reb Chaim in the Sefer, when he brings down this Rambam, he says b'pshitos that this din refers to also, it means is sheila nevela, The Rambam brings from the Rash, that the Rash says not like that. The Rash says that when it says li'omru elu l'sheretz bilvad, it's not sheil and nevela. A nevela is also included. But I'll call upon the Lashon HaRambam is li'omru safik tumat safa tor elu l'sheretz bilvad. And I'll call upon him. V'chol hanit. No, it's certainly not legabi atmei mes. We're saying that l'chura Reb Chaim in Sefer writes that it also doesn't refer to a nevela, and the Rash nems on bepshitos that it is for a nevela as well. I'll call upon. Then the Rambam continues and he says, "V'chol hanitlin v'hanigroden harein kimunochem." Because if you have a sheretz which is hanging on a person is like holding a sheretz and is dangling, or he's schlepping the sheretz, so then that's considered munochem. In other words, the din of a tumat sofa is because the tumah didn't really have its specific place. It didn't have like a muhzik place. So therefore, there's a certain kula in that din. When something is already more lying on the ground, it's nitlin, you're standing on the ground and it's hanging on you, or it's being schlepped on the ground, also you're schlepping it on the ground, or it's going on the ground, so since it's on the ground, so therefore it has the din of munachim. That's the din of Rambam. Yeah, some achreinim want to medayik. What about if it's thrown, in a matzav of being thrown? So being thrown has a din like tzofa. In other words, when you're schlepping it or you're holding it, so then it's considered like it's standing on the ground, like it has a place. Masha'inkin, if it's a matzav that is being thrown in the air, so in the air is no better than floating on water. Okay. Halacha Dalid. Now, the din of sheretz, shetzaf al pnei hamayim, is the taiches, because the sheretz doesn't really have a place. Since it's a matzav of tzofa, we said before, when it's negrorim or it's nitlim, so that's considered, it does have a place, the place where the person is standing. Masha'inkin, when it's tzaf al pnei hamayim, so that sheretz doesn't have a place. So therefore, but that's how the Chacham will retire a sheretz which doesn't have a place. Now the question is, if the sheretz is munach on top of something, which that something is floating. So do we say that since that something it's munach on is floating, so therefore the sheretz doesn't have a place? Or we say no, that since the sheretz is munach on something, so therefore even though that thing is floating, nevertheless the sheretz is considered has a place, and that's the din. That's this din. Sheretz shoyamunach b'keli, v'keli tzof al pnei hamayim. Oi shoyamunach al hames oi al hanevela, and lepel the shaila is whether the sheretz touched something that became tummy. Whereas the mess obviously didn't. Oi shoyamunach al hames oi al hanevela, v'afilu nimeach hanevela ipsar mes shetachtov. Oi shoyamunach al shichva zera. Hatzof al pnei hamayim, and again it's munach on something. In other words, it's munach on one hand, but the thing that it's munach on is floating. So the din is harezek munach al haaretz, that has a din of munach al haaretz. And what's the din of munach al haaretz? Shesveike b'shus hayochet tamik meshi yizbor. So now this din of sofik tuma al pnei hamayim, sofik tuma tzof al pnei hamayim is tor. The special din that tzof al pnei hamayim is tor is obviously the chiddush is only b'shus hayochet. B'rshus harab anyway is Sveikei Torah. We're going to learn Mehemshech. A Sofik Tum B'rshus harab is Sveikei Torah. So when do we say that Sofik Tum and only Sofik Tum B'rshus hayochet is Sveikei Torah? Now there's a chidush that if it's a Tum Tzofa, so then even a B'rshus hayochet is Sveikei Torah. So that's what he's saying, that it's Harizik Munach Alorish is Sveikei. If it's a B'rshus hayochet, Tomik Mishi Yizbar. Now Hoy is Sheretz al Gabi Sheretz Sofal Pnei Hamayim. It was like one Sheretz lying on top of another Sheretz. And the question is, if the top sheretz touch something, so then is hareze ketuma avash asof al pnei hamayim was Sveikei Torah, and over there the Sveikei Torah. Now hoyim munach al gabi mechatos, umechatos sofn al pnei hamayim. Over here you have mechatos, which water that was mixed with efer pura aduma, so therefore it has a certain substance. Because if you have stam water, so you can't really say it's floating on the water. It has to be something that even shechvazera, so it has a certain thickness to it, so therefore it can be floating on top of the water. So aldera, but if aldera is a mechatas that was mixed with afer, so in because of the afer, it has a certain thickness to it. So you can say that the mechatas is floating on top of the water. So hoyem munach al gabi mechatas, umechatas tzofn al pnei hamayim. So it's over here there is a suffix. Imu kimunach, if that considered munach, or any kimunach, or it's considered that the mechatas becomes bottled to the mayim, so mele it comes out that the sheretz, which is on top of the mechatas, which is on top of the mayim, it's kilo on top of the mayim. Lefichach yiro ali, since it's a suffix, it's Sveikei Torah. That's also Torah. So in other words, sof al pnei hamayim is Torah, and if it's a suffix, if it's considered sof al pnei hamayim, so it's also Torah. Yeah. Halacha hey, kederech shetiru sefek tumet sof al pnei hamayim, when the tum is sof al pnei hamayim. Ben bekel and ben bekarkois is kach tiaru sofik tara hasof al pnei hamayim. So it's not that the tumah was sof al pnei hamayim, but rather the tara was sof al pnei hamayim, and that's ben bekel and ben bekarkois. What's the case? Ketzad kigain, you have an areva shitmei mes. You have an areva which became tummy from a mess. The areva became tummy from a mess, and the kikar truma koruch besiv eben yor v'nos metecha. And you have a kikar of truma which is wrapped in a piece of niyor, which niyor word to translate as paper, but over here this paper is obviously like waterproof paper, and or sieve, which is also again holding back the water. So you have a kikar truma in this niyor or sieve, and it's lying in this areva, which the areva is a tmei mess. It became tummy from a mess. So it's an avatum. It's an avatum that became tummy from a mess. And v'yordu l'techa make shomim, and water fell into this areva. And when the smalis, and the areva became filled with water, and now v'nifshat haniyor, and now that niyor which was covering the kikar opened. Now varia kikar tzof al pnei hamayim, and the kikar now is floating on top of the niyor which is on top of the water. There's nothing to talk about that the kikar didn't become tummy from the water, because the water became tummy. But the niyor is mavdul b'nei levin hamayim. And now the question is the sofik noga. The question is only, did this kikar touch the areva or not? So this kikar is floating, and the areva is tamei, and the question is, did the kikar touch the areva or not? So the din is hareu b'tarasi b'pnei shu'utzaf. So just like when you have a sheretz which is floating, so that you say that it's sof al pnei mayim, so it's tar. So over here also, when you have the kikar floating in this areva, and the question is, did the kikar become tummy from the areva? We say that the kikar is tar. Now this areva is a tmei mes. We said before that there's a svara that this holding is by a sheretz, L'chure, so bishleim, if you hold it's also by an avela, so it's understandable. Masha'inkin l'chure, if you say it's not by an avela, so l'chure over here we seem to be saying that this din also applies to a tmei mes, lav dafka to a sheretz. So on that the answer, the pshat is as a tmei mes is also not metame b'masa. You don't become tame b'masa from carrying a tmei mes. So in that aspect, a tmei mes is similar to a sheretz. In other words, there's a difference between an avela and a sheretz. An avela is metame b'masa. So therefore, there's a svara to say that by an avela, taka doesn't apply. By an avela, it doesn't apply. The din of tumat sofa doesn't apply to an avela. It only applies to a sheretz, because a sheretz is a more kuladik tumah because it's not metame b'masa. But I was saying over here that it also applies to a tmei mes. The answer is because a tmei mes is also a kuladik similar to a sheretz, because it's also not metame b'masa. Okay. Halacha vov. Sheretz shenimtza tzof al gabi ber b'teich hagas. Now you have a gas. A gas is a place where you press grapes. Now, so the gas is a keli in which you press the grapes. Now in front of that keli, in front of that area, so you go ahead and the wine falls down into the ber. The wine falls down into the ber from the gas. It falls down into the ber. Now you found a sheretz that's tzof al gabi haber, which is b'teich hagas. Now the question is, the wine in the ber is obviously tummy. The sheretz is touching the wine in the ber. There's nothing to talk about. The question is, what about the wine that was in the gas? So what's the shaila? The shaila is, did the sheretz fall from the gas into the ber, or no? Somehow or another, the sheretz got into the ber without going through the gas. So that's the question. So lit truma, if we're clearing whether the wine in the gas is kosher lit truma, if that wine could be used as, you can go ahead and be mafresh truma, and go ahead and the kohen should eat it. So then sveki tummy. So we say it's tummy. We're worried that maybe the sheretz touched the wine, and the wine is puzzled. So it's truma psula. So the truma psula. If you're going to go ahead, so no, this wine is tummy. If you're going to go ahead and be mafresh truma and eat that truma, drink that truma, so it comes out you're eating truma tmeya. However, lepelim, you want to know, did the people that were in the gas, did they become tummy? So you say no, lepelim sveki tor mepnei shei tumat sofa. So mitzad, the principle of tumat sofa knows you have the tumah that's floating. You never really saw the tumah in its steady state. So as far as the pelim are concerned, we say the pelim never became tummy from this tumah. So we say the pelim are tummy. But as far as the truma is, as far as the wine is concerned, we're saying that the wine is a suffix tummy, and therefore you can't use the wine. I mean, if you're going to go ahead and be mafresh truma from this wine, you're not going to be able to drink the wine. There's a horror that achreinim is that l'chura, this din that tumat sofa is tor is also legabi truma b'pashtas. The person is tor even if he touches truma. So why over here are we saying that the yayin l'chura was tumat sofa? So l'chura the yayin should be tor also legabi truma. Why are we saying that the yayin is tummy legabi truma? That's a kasha that achreinim is. So that the Ram brings from the Chazdi from Mikdash David that he wants to say that the pshat is that by mashkin there's special chumras. By mashkin, the tumas mashkin, there's no, the heter of tumat sofa doesn't apply to mashkin. Since we're dealing over with mashkin, with yayin, so therefore there's no heter of this heter. We'll see later on that there's going to be a din that sofik tumah b'shus harabim is sveikitor, but in certain dinim over there by mashkin we don't say that heter. We'll learn by hemshach. So Al is over here. It's in the Rambam. It's not so clear. The Rambam doesn't really ask the kash, doesn't answer the teretz, but that's how they want to answer the teretz. I mean, maybe there's a mokum to think that the whole din of tumat sof is something is floating, and the question is whether you became tamei in the state of floating. So we say that the shaila is, did you touch it or not? So now we say, so we don't know. So tumat sofa is tar. So over here also the pe'alim, the question is, did the pe'alim ever touch this tumah which was sofa? So we say no, the pe'alim are tar because we don't know that they touched it. It's tumat sofa. But over here, when we're clearing about the yayin and the gas, it's not really a shaila whether the yayin and the gas touched this tumah was sofa. The shaila was whether the sheretz mechatchila came down from the gas, whether the sheretz came down from the gas. So maybe it could be that's a different type of tumah, maybe a different type of sofa. Could be. Halacha vov. Halacha zayin. Sofik. So that was the second. So we had already two things. We had the sofik ma'im shuvim we learned about, And then we had the Tumat Sofa, which we had Kama Protim in the din of Tumat Sofa al Gabi Mayim. So over there is Tira Chacham. You know, the original din of Tumat Sofa means you're in a place where there's a sheretz and it's Sofa al Gabi Mayim, and the question is, did it touch you or didn't it touch you? And we say that's Sveiki Tor. That's the original din. Now Halacha Zayin Sofik Mashkin L'Tami Achedim Tor L'Tumas Atzmon Tomi. That's what we said. L'Tumas Atzmon Tomi. Ketzad. What's the pshat? Hoya makal biyode, you had a stick in your hand. Ubereishe mashkin tmeim. On the top of the stick there was mashkin tmeim. Now v'zorkon l'tech kikris teres. You took the stick, which has mashkin tmeim on it, and you threw it amongst kikris teres. And sofik nagu mashkin b'kikris, sofik le nagu is teres. Now since there's a sofik whether this mashkin actually touched the kikris, in the mele it's tor. V'chein im nestapik le. Im nogu mashkin tmeim b'keli ze elei nogu. So the din is the mashkin tmeim is metame kelim also a din d'Rabbanan, and there's a suffix whether the mashkin touched the kelim or not and made him tummy is harei akeli tor. V'chein im nestapikle im nogu mashkin elu atmeim b'mashkin achelim elei nogu. Another shaila whether the mashkin touched other mashkin. So it's again harei mashkin achelim tmeim tehirim. So there's all mashkin achelim atehirim. So the shaila is, over here the shaila is whether the mashkin were matami, whether they were matami a kika shel truma, whether they were matami a keli, or they were matami mashkin achirim. Avol tomi sheposhet yodi ragel be mashkin teirim. If you have a person that was tomi, the shaila is not whether the mashkin tmeim were matami something else, but rather the tomi was poshet yodi ragel be mashkin teirim. A shazara kikar tomi will be mashkin teirim. And Sofik Noga b'mashkin Sofik Lei Noga, the Sofik is whether or not the mashkin became tummy, not whether the mashkin were metami, but rather whether the mashkin became tummy. So then is Arei L'Tmei Mesofik. So then it becomes tummy Mesofik v'chein kol keitzbasa. Halacha Ches Chavis Shimalei Mashkin Uposhat Hatami is Yodi le'avira. He put his hand into the avir and Sofik Noga b'mashkin Sofik Lei Noga. So the din is a mashkin tmei, because we learned before that if there's a suffix, if you touched mashkin and it became tummy, the suffix if you touched mashkin it became tummy, so the mashkin are tummy. But now over here the shaila is whether these mashkin were tmeim and were matami the chavis. Now, on one hand we're saying the mashkin, this is like we're saying like l'chura stira, we're saying the mashkin are tummy because we're nemon that he would touch the mashkin. But legabi, that's only legabi the mashkin, that the mashkin are tummy legabi atzmon. But now, when you're going to start clearing whether these mashkin were matami the chavis, you have to clear. We're not sure if the mashkin were matami the chavis. Depends if the mashkin were tummy or not. Let's say the mashkin are tummy, so maybe they were vadi matami the chavis. We don't say that. That's the chiddush over here. V'hachavis teira she'ein sofik mashkin matami. Again, normally there was two separate dinim. One shaila is whether mashkin could be matami something. That's shaila number one. And then there's another shaila whether mashkin could become tummy. Now over here, one shaila the klechura tali in the other. The question is, did the mashkin become tummy? That's shaila number one. And then the shaila is, if the mashkin became tummy, it was matami the chavis. If it didn't become tummy, it wasn't matami the chavis. So here we're saying that we split it. We say like this: Lagabi the mashkin being tummy, we say since it's a maybe the mashkin are tummy, so the mashkin are tummy. But since lepel the mashkin are only tummy misafik, so memela there's a suffix whether these mashkin were matami the chavis, so memela the chavis remains stored. Let's read again. Chavis shimulei mashkin uposhet hatami is yodi lavira and suffix noga b'mashkin suffix lei noga. So that it is a mashkin tmei because there's a suffix whether it became tummy. Aber liidov v'chavis teira. The chavis remains teira. She'ein suffix mashkin metami because the suffix mashkin is not metami, and memela over here there's a suffix whether these mashkin became tummy. So the din is harei chavis teira. So if you have mashkin, that be'emes this mashkin has a din that they're tummy misafik, and they go into a chavis. So again, the chavis is teira. Aber v'hamashkin shebetecha tehirin, because the mashkin which is in the chavis also remain teir. She'ein misamen al min chavis. In other words, the way it happens is that the mashkin has to be metami the chavis. And now the chavis has to be the time of the mashkin. So mainly we say like this, that the mashkin, since the mashkin are a suffix tummy, so suffix mashkin l'tami acherim is a suffix. So Mamela the Chavis remain Torah. Once the Chavis is Torah, so how could the mashkin which is in the Chavis become Tommy? The mashkin that becomes Tommy in a Chavis of Cheres, the way it works is that since the mashkin finds itself B'teich Chavis, which is Tommy, the mashkin becomes Tommy. But if the Chavis is Torah, so obviously the mashkin is Tommy. But mashkin should B'teich HaTeirah, Shein Mistam Melu Min HaChavis. Now, v'im l's'ar v'mashkin elu ha'sofik v'mashkin shebechavis, then arei kol ha'mashkin t'mei misofik. So then the mashkin is all tomei misofik, because lepel the mashkin became mixed in. It didn't become bottle. It's not bottle in the mashkin. So memela the mashkin became this tomei dikamashka in this Torah dikamashka. There's not tomei dikamashka. This sofik tomei dikamashka in the Torah dikamashka. So memela they all become tomei. So you don't have to become tomei because he was metame. It's metame because in this mashka there's tomei dikamashka. But since it's only sofik dikamashka dikamashka is vachavis teira. V'cheinem noflu mashkinelu l'teich tanur. So the memela hariyapaz v'tanur teir. Again, just be kitzer. The din is that mashkin could become tummy misofik, but mashka can't be metami acher misofik. So mele, if you have a sofik, whether or not when a tummy put his hand into a chavis, and Shilas, did the tummy touch the chavis or not? The mashka in the chavis. So the din is the mashka is tummy, because mashka could become tummy misofik. Shaila is only whether the mashka could be metami misofik. So now we say that the mashka can be metami misofik, which means two things. Sai, in two itziyurim the mashka can be metami misofik. Sai, if it's a sofik, if the mashka was noga, or the mashka was nei noga. And sai, if you have a mashka which has a din of a sofik tumah, because you have a mashka which has a din of a sofik tumah, so even though la'atzma you have to rechanzech with this mashka that it's tumah, but since lepel it's a sofik tumah, so it can be matami something else misofik. So a mashka can be matami something else misofik. So mainly when he sticks in his hand and there's a sofik whether the mashka became tummy or not, so mitzad this mashka we say the mashka became tummy because it's a sofik you machmer. But on the other end, if it became tummy, so let's say it was matami also the chavis, we say no. Because since the mashka only became tummy misofik, so that's a din of sofik mashkin, letami we go lekula. That's the yisod of this din. That's the yisod of this din. Now that's only talking about if the shilas if the mashka was matami the chavis. Masha'inkin if the mashka that's sofik tummy got mixed in with the mashka which is in the chavis. So if the mashka didn't get mixed in, so the chavis remains stored and the mashka in the chavis remains stored. So you have mashka that went into mashka that was in a chavis, and the shaila is whether this mashka was metame the chavis. So then we say that the mashka can be metame chavis. The mashka besofik can be metame chavis, and memela once it can be metame the chavis, it also can be metame the mashka which is beteicha chavis. But if that mashka which is a sofik tumah got mixed in with the mashka, so then they're both tummy together because you don't have to come on to being metame. The mashka tum, the sofik mashka is here. Halacha tes hamarabitz beisei b'mayim tmeim. A person like threw water onto his house. Hamarabitz means when you throw water over in your house, and throw mayim tmeim. Eishazolfum, or you poured the water into your house. Because there's water in your house on the floor that's mayim tmeim. And v'hoyishum taris in the house there were also taris. And sofik nitzu aleim, sofik le nitzu. You're not really sure whether some of the mayim tmeim sprinkled on this taharis which you had in the house, so they didn't sveikim tor, because that's this din that sofik mayim letame is sveikim tor. That's part of this din. Now solaf mashkin tehirim utmeim b'teichabayis. You poured water. Two batches of water in the house. One batch was tamei, one was tor, and v'nimtzu achar kach mashkin al kika shel truma. Now you go ahead. You see a kika shel truma, and you see moisture on top of it. And not love inishalola, and you don't know whether this water is mayim tehirim or mayim tmeim. So the question is, did the kikar become tummy? So the din is arizu teira. Why? Shahasofik hamashkin l'tami tor. Because since over here the shaila is whether this mashka was matami, so the shaila is this mashka which is on this kikar, could it be matami? So you don't know. You don't know if the mashka is tummy or not. So since you don't know if the mashka is tummy or not, so therefore we say that sofik mashka l'tami is tor. That's only talking about when you still have moisture on top of the kikar. So mainly the shaila is whether this mashka could be matami or not. So mainly we say we don't know. We don't know if it's tummy or tor. So sofik mashka l'tami is tor. However, hiniach hakikar achi yinogvu amayim she'alo. Now the water already dried out. There's no longer water on top of the kikar. So over here now the shaila is not about the water. Ultimately the shaila comes from the water, But lepil, right now the shaila is on the kicker. So the din is areze sofik tmei b'sofik. So then the kicker is tummy b'sofik. Why? Because we're doing a shusayachid, shusafik tuma, b'shusayachid tummy k'meshi yizbar. Vari ein kamashkin el kicker shehi sefik tmei sofik teir. So there's this din that sofik mashkin tummy or not sofik mashkin litami is tor only when the clear is about the mashkin. And as you have mashka, which that mashke was either a suffix, whether it's tummy or tor, or whether this mashke reached the kikar shel truma. So you have the mashke, and you have a clear whether this mashke reached the kikar shel truma. So then we say that it's a suffix on the mashke lutame, so it's tor. Mashengan over here, you have only a kikar shel truma. There's no mashke anymore. There's a kikar shel truma, and this kikar shel truma is dry. And the shaila is whether the kikar shel truma became tummy, even though the shaila be'emes is niveya whether the mashke was metame the kikar shel truma. So b'chi agav that doesn't go into the category of sofik mashke, and memela it's fake tummy. L'chura l'fize you're gonna have to say in halacha test, for example, we had a shaila, someone was merabas beisi b'mayim, and there was taris, and he doesn't know if nitzu aleim sofik nitzu sofik aleim nitzu. Well, is it wet or isn't it wet? If it's wet, l'chura he knows that it was nitzu, and if it's not wet, he knows it's lein nitzu. I mean, what's the shaila over here? And l'chura al kol chach, we have to say when it's not wet, and we don't know if it was nitzu or not. And l'chura now we're saying that when it's not wet, we say that it's sveki tummy because it's not a shaila on mayim. It's like a little bit shver. So the Rambam Aruch says that you're going to have to say that the case of halacha tes is also talking about that it was wet originally, and now it's still wet. And the question is, if the wetness that is there now is also as a result of the mayim tmeim. I mean, you have to add something to halacha tes, which doesn't really say there, based on halacha yud. It's like hard to understand. Because we're learning over here a new principle that this din, that mayim, sofik mayim letame, is toir, is only when the mayim are here. The mayim are here and we're being done on the mayim. We're being done on the mayim. Mashenkin, if the mayim aren't here, we only have a kikar shel truma, which is dry. And we have a clear whether mayim were metame it. So b'chi agavin, it doesn't have a din of sofik mayim letami, which should be tor. So it's a chidush. Halacha yudalef. Sofik yadayim, beilis tame, beiletami acherim, beiletarosim tor. So the din of yadayim is toher, is whether or not the shaila is whether the yadayim became tame, or whether the yadayim was metame something else, or even if we knew that the yadayim were tame, the question is that the yadayim become tor. Is all these cases the sveikas we say tor. Kesat. Hoyu yadav teiris. A person's both hands were tar. Ulefan of shnei kikrim tmeim, and he has two kikrim tmeim. L'chud is not to get over here that it was two kikrim tmeim. The ikir is that he has yadayim teiris, and the question is did the yadayim teiris touch something that was tummy? And sofik noga, sofik le noga. The shaila is did his hands touch, did his hand or his hands touch something which is tummy? Which the din is that if you touch something which is a rishon l'tumah, so you tzarich until yadayim. That's one way. His hands were tummy. And he has two kikrim teirim and sofik naga sefilei naga. So the first case was the shaila, did the yadayim become tummy? And the second one is the shaila, was he metami the item with his yadayim? Again, we're saying it says two yadayim, two kickers, but l'chud is lavdavka. Oi, another case is shahayu yadi achav teiris v'achas tmeya. He has one hand that's tor and one hand that's tummy. Ulefan of shnei kikri teirim. And naga be'echad mem, v'sofik b'tmei and naga sofik b'teira. We don't know with which hand you touched the kicker. Did you touch the kicker with your hand that was tummy, or did you touch the kicker with the hand that was tor? And which again, l'chur is not negeh shnei kikrim over here. L'chur, the word is that he has shnei yadayim, one is tummy and one is tor, and he touched the kicker. And the question is, which hand did he touch it with? Eisha yiyadav tehiris, ulefan of shnei kikrim echad tor v'echad tummy. And v'nogad be'echad mem, sofik b'tami nogad sofik b'tor nogad. Over here, neged there's two shnei kikrim. In other words, he has one kicker which is tummy, one kicker which is tor, and the question is which kicker he touched. We touched the kicker again. In the first case, the shaila is whether the yadayim was metame, this shaila is whether the yadayim became tummy. Yodav achas teirav achas tmeya. He has one hand that's tor and one hand is tummy. Lefon of kicker tummy, the kicker tor. And v'naga b'shneim, he touched him with both hands. Touched one kicker with one hand, one kicker with the other hand. And v'naga b'shneim, and sofik tmeir b'tomi v'teira b'tor, a tmeir b'tor v'teira b'tomi. We're not sure which hand touched which kicker, whether the tor dike hand touched the tor dike kicker, so nothing happened. And the tomi dike hand touched the tomi dike kicker, so again nothing happened. Or we say, no, maybe the third dike hand touched the tummy dike kikar, so the hand became tummy. And the tummy dike hand touched the third dike kikar, so the kikar became tummy. So the din is no, ayodayim k'meishahayu, the yodayim remain both teheres, v'akikris k'meishahayu, because we say always the suffix is tor, inside the suffix whether the yodayim became tummy, inside the suffix whether the kikar became tummy. V'chein, that's the din till now, the shaila was whether the yodayim became tummy or the kikar became tummy. V'chein, im hoyu yodov tmeis, a person's hands were tummy, v'hid bilon, and then he went ahead and was tabled them. Oy notlom, he did natilas yodayim, and suffix shamayim shetiru bem kshedim liyodayim. Suffix came shulim, he doesn't know whether this mayim was kshedim natilas yodayim or not, and or suffix yesh bem kishir, suffix ein bem, or suffix shayidover chetzes al yod, suffix shleihoya. So in all these cases, I raise the teres. It's tor because again, the suffix natilas yodayim is considered tor. The suffix natilas yodayim is called tor. The chura bepashtos, this din of these sveikas, or even of all the sveikas are here. In other words, we start suffix shamayim shetarabim ksherim liyadayim suffix shem psul. That's one suffix. And then even if they were kosher, so suffix yeshbem kashir, suffix einbem kashir. And even if yeshbem kashir, there's a suffix of echtzitza. So l'chorah, there's many sveikas. Nevertheless, we say suffix hayod of teres, because lepel, that's the suffix of taras yadayim but teres, even of common sveikas. That's l'chorah the pashtus advar. Allah yud beis. Hoyse yodi achas tmeya. Person knows for sure one hand's a stomach. Ve'ini yedeh ezehi. Is emrim le sheliyase taras achiyit l'shtei yodav. Since he knows both, one of the hands are tummy, and Mamela, if he's going to go ahead and use one of the hands, he knows that one of the hands are tummy, so he should go ahead and be noitel beis yodav before he does taras. However, if noga ba'achas mebetaras, if lepel he went ahead and used one of his hands and he touched taras, kedim sheyitul yodav taras of taras. Because since lepel it's a suffix whether he was metamiyit, so lepel the taris of teres. So lechatchila he shouldn't do that. Why? He knows for sure one of them is tummy. Masha'inke b'diavad lepel. If he did it, so since b'diavad we say that suffix yadayim is teres, so Mamela over here say he touched taris with a hand which was suffix tummy, even though he knows for sure it's not stam a suffix over here, because over here it's a suffix. He knows for sure one of them is tummy, and nevertheless he went ahead. It's like a chazik isura, and he went ahead and he touched with one of them. Nevertheless, we say that that it stores tares of teres, even though the chatchila you should go ahead and be tabled.